The tension in the house grew unbearable. Every interaction with Michael felt like walking a tightrope. Every visit from Claire felt like a test I was destined to fail. Ethan, too, was becoming bolder, his frustration with our secrecy growing. One evening, as we sat in the library, he turned to me, his expression hard. "I can't keep doing this," he said. "Ethan, we have to be careful," I replied, my voice trembling. "Careful isn't enough," he shot back. "Ryan's suspicious, Claire's sniffing around, and Michael's not as clueless as you think." I looked away, tears pricking at my eyes. "What are you suggesting? That we stop?" Ethan moved closer, his voice softening. "You know I can't do that. But we need to figure out what we're going to do, because this isn't sustainable." The breaking point came during a dinner party Michael insisted on hosting. Claire was there, of course, along with a few of Michael's colleagues. Ryan showed up too, his invitation courtesy of Ethan. The evening started out innocently enough. Polite conversation, laughter, the clinking of wine glasses. But as the night wore on, the atmosphere shifted. "So, Sophia," Claire said, her voice cutting through the chatter, "how do you keep yourself occupied with Michael gone so often?" I froze. Her question dripped with implication. "The usual things," I replied, trying to stay calm. "Gardening, reading, helping Ethan with a few projects." Claire's smile sharpened. "You must be very close then." Across the table, Ryan raised an eyebrow, his gaze flicking to Ethan. "Yeah, Ethan's been spending a lot of time here lately. I guess it makes sense. Sophia is pretty easy to talk to." The table fell silent. Michael looked between us, his expression unreadable. Claire sipped, her wine eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Ethan stood abruptly. "Excuse me," he muttered, leaving the room. "I think I'll check on him," I said quickly, standing up. I found Ethan pacing in the garden under the soft glow of the patio lights. "This was a mistake," he said, as I approached. "What was?" I asked, my heart racing. "All of it," he replied, his voice tight. "Letting Ryan come here, pretending everything's fine." "It's not, Sophia. It's fallen apart." I reached for him, brushing his arm. "We'll figure it out." He looked at me, desperation in his eyes. "How?" "Because I'm running out of ways to hold this together." Before I could respond, we froze at the sound of footsteps on the gravel. Michael stood at the garden's edge, his figure silhouetted in the soft light. "What's going on out here?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. The final confrontation was about to begin, and everything we had hidden for so long was about to be exposed. Michael stood at the edge of the garden, his posture tense, his expression cold as he watched us. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Ethan and I stood frozen, unsure of how to proceed. The weight of his gaze was suffocating. "What's going on out here?" Michael repeated, his voice low and dangerous. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Ethan and I exchanged a brief look, and I could see the fear in his eyes. "We were just talking," I said, forcing a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nothing's wrong." Michael's eyes flicked between us, his expression unreadable. "Funny how the two of you seem to have so much to talk about," he said, his voice sharp, the words dripping with suspicion. Ethan straightened up, his jaw clenched. "Is there a problem, Michael?" Michael took a step forward, his lips curling into a cold smile. "I don't know. Should there be?" The air between us felt like it was thickening, the tension rising with each passing second. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my chest. Michael was no longer just guessing. He knew he had finally put the pieces together. Ethan hesitated, but then he nodded and turned to leave. "I'll go inside," he muttered, his voice tight. "No," Michael snapped, his voice dark. "You'll stay right here." Ethan stopped but didn't move. Michael turned his attention back to me, his gaze icy. "Care to explain why my wife and my son are sneaking around in the garden during a dinner party?" I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. I was frozen, unable to speak, the weight of the moment settling heavily on my shoulders. Michael's voice cut through the silence again, and his suspicion was now undeniable. The next day, Michael's attitude toward me was colder than ever. His clipped tone and icy stares made it clear he wasn't going to let this go. He tried to keep his distance, but his efforts only seemed to make things worse. Claire, of course, saw an opportunity to insert herself into the chaos. "I couldn't help but notice the awkwardness last night," Claire said, sipping her coffee in the kitchen, her voice dripping with false concern. "It was just a misunderstanding," I said, trying to keep my tone light and casual. Claire tilted her head, her smile overly sweet. "Of course, but Sophia, you might want to be careful. Perceptions can be dangerous, especially in a situation like this." I felt my stomach drop. Her words weren't just a warning, they were a threat. I could see the satisfaction in her eyes, and it made my blood run cold. Later that evening, Michael called me into the study. His demeanor was calm, but there was an unnerving edge to his stillness. "I've been thinking," Michael said as he leaned back in his chair. "Maybe it's time we made some changes." "Changes?" I asked cautiously, my heart sinking. "Ethan's been here long enough," Michael said, his tone casual. "I think it's time he moved on, found his own place." I was taken aback. "Michael, he's still figuring things out. He needs time. He can figure it out somewhere else," Michael interrupted, his voice firm. "This isn't up for debate." The tension continued to build as Michael made it clear he was determined to have Ethan leave. The confrontation that had been looming, finally, reached its breaking point when I told Ethan. His reaction was explosive. "He's kicking me out," Ethan said, his voice rising with disbelief. "Because of what?" "A conversation in the garden." "He's suspicious," I said, trying to calm him down. Ethan shook his head. He thinks something's going on, doesn't he? That's his problem." "Not ours." I reached for his arm, trying to steady him. "We knew this was a risk. We can't let this spiral any further." Ethan was furious. "He's not doing this because he's suspicious. He's doing it because he's trying to control you, and I won't let him." The night Michael told Ethan to leave was the night everything changed. Michael's voice was cold and firm, and his ultimatum was clear. "You have a week to pack your things," Michael said calmly over dinner. Ethan slammed his fork onto his plate, standing up abruptly. "You don't get to decide when I leave," he snapped. "This is my house," Michael replied, his voice icy. "And I won't tolerate this any longer." Ethan's anger flared. "Tolerate what? Me being here or me getting closer to Sophia than you ever could?" The room fell into silence. My blood ran cold as Michael's face darkened, and I felt the weight of his glare. He stood slowly, his voice now low and dangerous. "Get out of this house before I make you regret it." That night, I found Ethan in his room, packing his suitcase. His anger had not subsided, and neither had mine. "You can't let him win," Ethan said, his voice tight with frustration. "This isn't about winning," I said softly. "This is about surviving." Ethan's eyes burned with intensity. "You don't have to stay here. You don't have to stay with him." "I don't have a choice," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. "There's always a choice," Ethan said, stepping closer to me. "Come with me." The words hung in the air, and for a moment I considered it. The possibility of leaving everything behind, of starting fresh somewhere far away, but the reality of what that would mean quickly crashed down on me. I shook my head. "I can't," I said, my voice cracking. Ethan's eyes softened, but he nodded. "Then I'll go," he said quietly. "But this isn't over." The next morning, Ethan was gone. Michael didn't speak to me, and I spent the day wandering the empty house, haunted by the silence. But the real shock came later that evening when I found a note slipped under my bedroom door. "You think you've won, Michael, but you don't know the truth. I'll make sure you do, Claire." My hands shook as I read the note. Claire knew. She'd seen something, overheard something, and now she was using it to her advantage. The note felt like a ticking time bomb in my hands, and I stood frozen, the words blurring as I read them over and over. The next day, I confronted Claire. I cornered her in the kitchen, my voice low and trembling as I held out the note. "What is this?" I demanded. Claire didn't flinch. She leaned against the counter, a smirk playing at the corner of her lips. "Exactly what it says. Michael deserves to know the truth, don't you think?" "There's nothing to tell," I said quickly, though my voice faltered. Claire raised an eyebrow, her gaze laced with mock sympathy. "Oh, Sophia, you don't really believe that, do you? I've seen the way you and Ethan look at each other. I'm not blind." My heart clenched, and I stepped closer, my voice dropping. "If you think you can manipulate me with this, you're wrong. I won't let you destroy my family." Claire laughed softly, shaking her head. "Destroy your family, Sophia? You've already done that. I'm just speeding up the inevitable." Before I could respond, I heard Michael's voice from down the hallway. Claire's smile widened. "Don't worry," she whispered. "I'll handle the timing." That evening, Michael was quieter than usual, his mood tense as he picked at his dinner. Claire had left hours earlier, but her presence still lingered like a dark cloud. The silence between Michael and me was suffocating. Finally, Michael sat down his fork and looked at me. "Sophia, is there something you want to tell me?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. I froze, panic rising in my chest. I forced a smile. "What do you mean?" Michael leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "You've been acting strange lately, and then there's Claire dropping hints about things I don't understand. If there's something going on, now's the time to tell me." I struggled to keep my composure. "Michael, there's nothing going on. Claire is just trying to stir up trouble. You know how she is." Michael studied me for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I hope you're right," he said, his voice heavy with warning. "Because if I find out otherwise—" He didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what he meant. The pressure was building. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with possibilities. Claire's threat weighed heavily on me, and Michael's growing suspicion felt like a time bomb. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I grabbed it, my heart pounding as I read the message. "Meet me tomorrow noon at the park by the bridge, Ethan." I left the house the next day under the pretense of running errands. When I arrived at the park, Ethan was waiting by the bridge, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets. "You shouldn't have contacted me," I said, as I approached, my voice trembling. "I didn't have a choice," he replied, frustration in his eyes. "Claire came to see me." "What?" I breathed, my heart sinking. "She knows," Ethan nodded. "She knows everything, Sophia, and she's using it to get to Michael." My stomach churned. "What did she say to you?" "She wants me to confess," he said bitterly. "She wants me to tell Michael the truth, She's playing both of us, Sophia. I closed, my eyes, the weight of it all crashing down on me. We're running out of time, I whispered. Ethan took my hand, his touch grounding me. Then we have to act before she does. It all started with something so trivial that I could hardly believe it led to everything falling apart. I was in the living room folding laundry when Ethan called from the hallway. Sophia, can you help me with this? I turned to see him standing by the stairs, struggling with his belt. His khaki shorts hung loosely around his hips, and the leather strap of his belt was tangled awkwardly. Can you fix this? It's stuck or something, he asked, walking over to me. Sure, I said, setting the towels aside. I moved closer, trying to untangle the strap from the buckle. Still stuck, I asked, concentrating. Make sure to subscribe to my channel so I can continue bringing you more fascinating true stories like this one. And don't forget to watch this video till the end and like the video, because this story is going to be incredibly interesting. Please hit the like button to show your support. Yeah, sorry, he replied, holding his breath as I worked. When I finally managed to pull the buckle free, his shorts fell down to his ankles. Time seemed to freeze. I instinctively glanced down, seeing more than I wanted to before quickly looking away. Ethan stood frozen, his hands awkwardly hovering, his face bright red. Sorry, he muttered hastily, pulling his shorts back up. I stepped back, embarrassed. It's fine, it happens. Yeah, thanks, for the help, he stammered. He quickly rushed upstairs, leaving me alone, my heart pounding. It had been an accident, a brief, awkward moment, but something shifted between us after that. The air felt charged, and I couldn't shake the feeling that things had changed. Neither of us ever spoke of it, but from that day on, our relationship was never the same. My marriage to Michael wasn't what you'd call a fairy tale. It wasn't bad either, just a quiet, comfortable routine that had slowly lost its warmth. We'd married when I was 44 and he was 50, both of us having come out of failed first marriages. Michael was a creature of habit with regular golf games, fishing trips and work dinners that kept him busy. I had learned to live with the silence between us, filling my days with gardening, charity work, and keeping the house tidy. Then Ethan moved in. Michael's son from his first marriage had always been polite, but distant. I'd only seen him occasionally, during the early years of my marriage during obligatory holiday visits. When he was still in college, he'd always been shy, awkward, in that typical way young men are with new stepmothers. But now, 6 years later, the man who showed up at our doorstep wasn't the same reserved teenager I remembered. Ethan had just graduated and was struggling to find his way in the world. His fine arts degree, which Michael didn't think much of, hadn't led to success, and Michael offered him a place to stay while he figured things out. I didn't have much of a say, but I didn't mind. The house was big enough, and I welcomed some company during the long hours Michael spent working or out with friends. What I didn't expect was how Ethan's presence would change the dynamics in the house. Ethan had a charm about him, the kind that made people gravitate toward him. His dry sense of humor and infectious smile filled the empty spaces in the house, in a way Michael never did. It started with small moments. One morning I was trimming the hedges when Ethan appeared with a cup of coffee, barefoot and still half asleep. He leaned against the door, watching me work with a lazy grin. "You're up early," I remarked. He shrugged and sipped his coffee. "Couldn't sleep? Besides, someone has to admire all the work you're putting in out here." I laughed and shook my head. "Don't let Michael hear you say that. He thinks this garden just takes care of itself." "Michael doesn't notice much," Ethan replied casually, but with a hint of pointedness. The comment caught me off guard, but I didn't press him on it. Over the next few weeks, our conversations grew longer, and our interactions became more natural. Ethan would hang around the kitchen while I cooked, telling me stories about his college days or asking advice about job applications. One afternoon, I found him sprawled on the couch in the living room, sketching in his notebook. "Mind if I take a look?" I asked, nodding to the pad. He hesitated before handing it over. The pages were filled with intricate pencil sketches, portraits, landscapes, and abstract designs that seemed to come alive. "These are amazing," I said. "Genuinely impressed." "Thanks," he said quietly. "I just do it to pass the time." "You should show these to someone," I suggested. "A gallery, an art director. You have real talent, Ethan." He smiled faintly, meeting my eyes. "You're the first person who said that." The weight of his words hung between us, and for the first time I felt a stirring inside, something I couldn't quite identify. By then came the belt incident, and things began to unravel. For days, the air between us was thick with tension that neither of us knew how to address. I tried avoiding being alone with him, but the house was too quiet and too small for that. We kept running into each other. One evening, I was washing dishes when Ethan came into the kitchen, his hair damp from a shower. "Sophia," he said softly. I turned, my heart racing at the sound of my name. "Yes?" I asked, hesitating. "I'm sorry about the other day. That was awkward," he said, his hands shoved into his jeans pockets. "It's fine," I said quickly, turning back to the sink. "Let's just forget about it." "I don't think I can," he admitted, his voice almost a whisper. I froze. His words were heavy, and I felt my chest tighten. I turned to face him, struggling with emotions I didn't know how to handle. "Ethan, we can't," I began, but I couldn't finish. He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "I know, but I don't want you to think it didn't mean anything to me." The intensity in his voice left me speechless, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then Michael's voice called from the front door, breaking the moment. "I'll be right there," I said quickly, turning away from Ethan. But even as I walked away, I knew that something had changed. The following days were filled with avoidance and stolen glances. Michael remained oblivious, watching TV or going out with friends, leaving Ethan and me to navigate this minefield we'd created. One afternoon, as I folded laundry, Ethan appeared in the doorway. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice tentative. I hesitated before nodding. "Close the door." He stepped inside, shutting it behind him. "I don't know how to act around you anymore," he said, his voice raw. "Ethan, we have to let this go," I said, trembling. "It was just a moment." "But it wasn't just a moment," he said, stepping closer. "Not for me." I understood then it wasn't just a moment for me either. That night, Ethan kissed me. It wasn't planned, but it happened. Later, as I pulled back, I told him, "This can't happen again." He nodded, but his eyes said he didn't believe it, and neither did I. The days following the kiss were a whirlwind of stolen moments and quiet desperation. Ethan and I tried to act like nothing had changed, but the tension between us was undeniable. Every glance, every accidental touch felt charged, heavy with what we weren't saying. Michael remained oblivious, his attention divided between work, his friends, and his endless hobbies. But no matter how distracted he was, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were playing with fire. The second time it happened, it was in the garden. I had spent the morning tending to the roses, the warm sun beating down on my back, when Ethan appeared behind me. "You're always out here," he said, his voice cutting through the stillness. "It's peaceful," I replied, not turning around. He stepped closer, casting a shadow over me. "I think you like avoiding me." My breath caught, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" he asked softly, but with insistence. I turned to face him, and this time there was no hesitation, no moment to stop myself. He kissed me again, and this time I kissed him back. What began as fleeting moments of longing spiraled into something neither of us could control. At first, we were careful, finding quiet corners of the house where we wouldn't be disturbed. But as time passed, we became bolder, unable to resist the pull between us. One evening, while Michael was out for a client dinner, Ethan and I found ourselves in the library. I pretended to organize the shelves, my hands shaking, as he stood behind me. "You're shaking?" he murmured, his breath warm against my neck. "I'm fine," I said, though my voice betrayed me. He placed his hands on my shoulders and turned me to face him. "You don't have to be afraid." "I'm not afraid of you," I said. I whispered, my voice breaking. "I'm afraid of what we're doing." He cupped my face in his hands, his gaze steady. "Then stop thinking about it. Just be with me." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him we couldn't keep doing this, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I allowed him to pull me into his arms, and for the first time in years, I felt alive. The secrecy of our relationship only heightened the intensity. Every stolen moment felt like an act of rebellion against the dull life I had settled into, a reminder that there was still passion buried beneath the routine of my marriage. But with the excitement came the fear. One afternoon, as Ethan and I sat on the couch in the living room, Michael came home earlier than expected. "Sophia," he called out from the hallway. I jumped up, my heart racing as Ethan quickly moved to the opposite side of the room. "In here," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. Michael walked in, glancing between us. "Didn't realize you'd have company," he said, his tone casual, though his eyes lingered on Ethan. "Just catching up," Ethan said smoothly, his posture relaxed. Michael nodded, but the look he gave me as he walked away sent a chill down my spine. As careful as we were, it became harder to hide. Michael began asking questions, subtle at first, but gradually more pointed. "You and Ethan seem to be getting along well," he remarked one evening as we sat at the dinner table. "He's been a big help around the house," I replied, forcing a smile. Michael nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'm glad to see that. It's good to know someone's keeping you company while I'm busy." His words carried an undertone I couldn't quite place, and I felt the blood drain from my face. The first real crack came when Ethan's best friend Ryan showed up unannounced. Ryan was loud, opinionated, and had a talent for picking up on things others tried to hide. "You've been spending a lot of time at home," Ryan said to Ethan one afternoon, his tone light but his eyes sharp. "Just helping out," Ethan replied casually. "Must be nice," Ryan said, his gaze flicking to me. "Having someone to keep you company." The comment sent a chill through me, and I quickly excused myself, leaving the two of them alone. Later, Ethan found me in the kitchen, his expression tense. "Ryan knows something," he said quietly. "I'm guessing," I replied, though my voice wavered. Ethan shook his head. "He's not stupid. Michael's going to figure it out." As the weeks went on, the tension in the house became unbearable. Michael's suspicions, Ryan's comments, the weight of our secret. It felt like a storm waiting to break. But even as the risks grew, so did my feelings for Ethan, and no matter how dangerous it became, I couldn't bring myself to let him go. Keeping a secret is like holding your breath underwater. You can only do it for so long before the pressure starts to crush you. Ethan and I were good at hiding, but the cracks in our facade were becoming more and more evident. Michael wasn't blind, and neither was Ryan. Then there was Claire, Michael's colleague, who managed to turn her casual visits into something more intrusive. Claire arrived one Saturday afternoon uninvited but perfectly at ease. She had visited the house a few times before, always under the pretense of dropping something off for Michael. This time she came with a bottle of wine and an overly bright smile. "I thought I'd stop by," she said as she walked into the kitchen, where I was chopping vegetables. "I'm fine," I replied, forcing a smile. Claire placed the bottle on the counter and leaned against the island, her eyes scanning the room like she was cataloguing every detail. "This place is gorgeous. You've done such a good job making it feel like a home." "Thank you," I said, my voice tight. Her gaze lingered on the back door, where Ethan had walked out only moments before. "Michael's lucky to have you. And Ethan, of course. He's such a big help around here, isn't he?" My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my expression neutral. "He's been great. It's nice having him around." Claire's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I bet it is." As the weeks went on, Claire's presence in the house became more frequent. She found excuses to stop by, always pretending it was for work, but I could tell her true aim was to gather information. Whether it was about Michael or Ethan, I couldn't say. "You know," she said one afternoon as we sat in the living room, "Michael doesn't talk much about his personal life, but I get the sense that things haven't been perfect between you two." I stiffened, my hands gripping the teacup in my lap. "Every marriage has its challenges," I said, trying to remain calm. Claire's smile was too sweet to be genuine. "Of course, but I'm sure it helps having Ethan around. He seems attentive." The implication was clear, and I felt panic rising in my chest. Then there was Ryan. Ethan's best friend had always been blunt to the point of rudeness, but now his comments were harsher. "You've been spending a lot of time with Sophia," Ryan said one evening as he and Ethan sat on the patio, beers in hand. Ethan shrugged, keeping his tone casual. "She's my stepmom. Of course we're going to talk." "Yeah, but it's not just that, is it?" Ryan pressed, his eyes piercing. Ethan's grip on his bottle tightened. "What are you trying to say?" "I'm saying you're acting weird," Ryan replied. "And I think it's not just because of the job stuff. There's something else going on, and I think it involves her." Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the stone. "You don't know what you're talking about." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "Don't I?